So are we supposed to start the podcast?
1, 2, 3.
You nailed it.
Nailed it that time.
You absolutely nailed it. It is going to be a fantastic episode of IHIP News because we have a brilliant author.
Yes.
Who really is sitting in the craw of a lot of the right-wing book banners.
When we found out that your book was in the top 3 banned in the country, I was like, I immediately have to read it.
Let me introduce George M. Johnson, the author of All Boys Aren't Blue. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
So for our viewers and listeners that haven't read your book or heard of it, tell us the premise of your book and what prompted you to share this story.
Yeah, so I had been a journalist for several years, and there was a young kid whose name was Giovanni Melton, and he was killed by his father, a young 15-year-old Black gay kid. And when the story came out, the police report stated that the father said he would rather have a dead son than a gay son. And I had been writing my story in bits and pieces, just as a writer and a journalist for a while. And that was really what triggered me to say, I needed to put together a body of work that could help to try and shift this narrative around how we raise queer children. And so my story is simple. It's that I grew up as a Black queer child, but I grew up with a very queer and LGBTQ affirming family. And so I grew up with a transgender cousin. And so queerness was a norm for us, and I didn't realize that I was an outsider to community until I stepped outside of the house, because within my family, our community looked like every type of person and every type of gender and every type of sexuality. And so this is that struggle. The book just shows what that struggle is for a young Black queer kid who doesn't have the resources, who doesn't have images of themselves on TV or anywhere else, having to navigate a society where they're extremely loved at home while being extremely hated in many pockets of community. But I wanted to showcase that it is okay for us to love on Black queer kids and give them the same type of love that other children get within the household, but that love in the household is still not enough, and that there are still a lot of societal things that go on with us that we have to continue to fight and also have to continue to educate Gen Z on so that they don't make the same mistakes that I made. And so the book really became a roadmap to the new generation and a guide for healing to my generation and generations prior who never got to feel seen or never felt like they got to tell their story.
And in your book, you share an experience of sexual abuse. And this seems to be at the crux of the conservative outrage. And I think this is really an interesting point because you're sharing something real, an abuse that happened with you. And it seems like they want to silence you and that this has to be, the carpet has to be picked up and swept under the rug. And what I find so fascinating about this is Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana is the one who read an excerpt from your book. So I hit Google, George, to see if he has had any committee hearings about the Southern Baptist Church and the sexual abuse and cover-up for decades in this church. And he has not had one hearing about it. He has not had a Baptist preacher or anybody high up in the Southern Baptist management. Yet he gets in this committee and he reads from your book, which is a very real experience. So what is that like when you see this senator taking your book and trying to scare people?
One, I was on a flight when it happened, so I couldn't really respond because the Wi-Fi makes it hard to even try to respond in the moment. But he put on this very, very thick accent. It was I couldn't explain. It was foghorn leghorn kind of mixed with I guess this is how I imagine what Atticus Finch might have sounded like. And it was the most Southern accent that I had ever but it was like so manufactured. I was like, that doesn't even sound right. So that part made me laugh. I think the other part about it was like, if you really break down what he said, I was still practicing safe sex at the age of 20. So like, it also like, okay, so, well, this is still talking about a person who is using condoms and a person who's engaging in a consensual act versus when a non-consensual act had happened. Like it was just a very, very like interesting moment in history, I guess, like to have my words read in that way. But I think the thing that bothered me the most was they keep saying they don't want teens to read my book because of the graphic details of certain things in the book, and then they keep publicly reading them and posting the things that are in the book. And so I've struggled with what their actual fight is for months now, because like they'll make these huge poster boards of the excerpts and place them like in courthouses, and they've done some wild stuff.
Right.
And I'm always, but if you don't want them to know what's in the book, then why do y'all keep publicly putting the passages and saying them? Like, he said it and it went viral. And I was like, so now all the teens literally don't have to read the book because you just read it for them. So I think that's where I felt like they lost the plot a little bit. And I still struggle with what we're actually fighting about, especially after that happened. Because I was like, well, if you were willing to do that on national television and for it to go viral so that anybody could click it, hear what is in the book, then are you really trying to keep this information from them? Like, what is your actual fight or argument? So, yeah.
That's one thing that always mystifies me about this big push to ban books. Now, we grew up in the 80s, and if they would have banned books, we didn't have home computers with Google. So that would have really locked us out of reading, whatever book they're trying to ban. But now, I mean, in the digital era, the book is not the first thing kids run to get information.
Right.
It's their smartphone. And so the whole book banning, it is dangerous. It is scary, but it also seems rather arbitrary, considering I would just be like, oh, this book is banned. I can't get in the library. Well, let me Google it.
Right.
And immediately, and then you would find a U.S. senator reading a passage from it. So it seems, it seems so performative, albeit very dangerous. It's a very dangerous time to ban books. We like to browbeat Ron DeSantis a lot. We call him Governor Kitten Heels, because he wears the little hill. But somehow when I was researching you, I clicked on some document and it showed all of these school districts where your book is banned. And it was Florida, 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 Florida. So when you see, Ron DeSantis and then his friend Bridget Ziegler, who is the Moms for Liberty.
I know who Bridget is.
She engages in a little menage a trois and kind of does some gay stuff, it seems like, and there's some videotapes of it and whatnot. When you see that hypocrisy, as somebody who has very earnestly and bravely told your story, and by telling your truth that you're going to get criticized, that's going to happen, but you fight through it and do it. And then you see this breathtaking hypocrisy of these are the people that are fighting your book. Tell us what that feels like.
Yeah, I remember when the story first came out, I was like, And I wasn't surprised. It just was like adding another layer to what this is really about. And it's like very like secret society type stuff. Like on the surface, we need the United States to look very heterosexual, very patriarchal, very straight, very white, very none of these things. But if you do it behind closed doors, then all of that's fine, right? It reminds me of the times when it was okay to rape your wife, right? Well, as long as you're married, it's okay to rape your wife. Just do that behind closed doors, and it has nothing to do with us, and we won't get the police involved and all those type of things. And so when I look at it, I'm just watching like us trying to roll back time. Like I always wondered when the MAGA hats came out, like, well, what time period are we talking about?
Exactly.
And at first I was like, okay, maybe they want to go back like 1950s, 1960s, right before the Civil Rights Act. And then, DeSantis goes, slavery had benefits. And I was like, oh, you want to go back to the 1850s?
Right.
Okay. So I get it in that. Like y'all just want full dominance over reproductive rights, over women, over queer people, over Black people, over everybody, while still being hypocrites within your own homes. And it is interesting with Florida specifically, because that was where I first got my first criminal complaint against the book.
What?
Yeah, I got a criminal charge against the book in Flagler, Florida. We beat the charge, but that was like the first time I didn't know you could take a book to a sheriff's office and file criminal charges for pornography. But that's what was done. But we were able to beat that charge. But I'm also going to Pensacola, Florida next week for the federal lawsuit that we filed against Escambia County for their removal of the books against the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So it has been a very, very long journey with me in Florida. The Don't Say Gay bill, right. He didn't say my book. He said one of the other guy's books, but he didn't say my book, but he read a passage and everybody knew he was talking about my book. So it's been a very targeted attack, but the hypocrisy has always been there. They have found pedophiles within the Moms for Liberty. They have.
That's right.
Now we have this going on within the Moms for Liberty. It's like, it's all been there. And then a lot of those members used to deal with gender dysphoria. And so I think our books are shining a mirror to their face that they don't want to see. And so they'd rather eradicate the mirror than to face the mirror. And our books have become the mirror.
You know, what's interesting is all of these people are big Bible pushers, right? And the Bible is, there's a lot of scandalous sex stories in the Bible. And
right.
One in particular I'd like to highlight right now is Lot. And he's this old fella and he has these young daughters. And the daughters are upset because they can't get pregnant. And so they slip their dad a Mickey, basically. They roofie their dad, have sex with their dad, and then they both get pregnant with their dad. And we have this nut superintendent. We live in Oklahoma, so it's right there with Florida. And we have this superintendent who is an absolute maniac, book banning nut. And he wants to put the 10 Commandments in all of the classrooms. And he wants to, I'm sure your book is a huge target of his. I try not to watch the local news so that I can not deal with depression and anxiety. But he wants the Bible in every U.S. classroom. And it just seems so insane to me how these people cherry pick their morality.
Yes.
That as long as it's in the Bible and people are, roofing their father and having incest rape, that's fine. But as you said, a 20-year-old having consensual safe sex is somehow this huge taboo. But meanwhile, Bridget is over there slapping, tickling, and scissoring with some gal, that's in right-wing politics in Florida.
Right. It's just like major hypocrisy. And it's funny because a lot of times at the school board meetings, people will read from the Bible to prove but the people up there don't know that they're like reading or interpreting passages from the Bible.
Yes,
and then be in there and it's the Bible. And then everybody goes off and cheers because it's like this is stuff we all learned when we were young. You had to teach about, what was it, Mary Magdalene, wasn't that?
Yeah.
Who she was. It wasn't that they skipped over those parts when we were young. They just had to teach it in a way that made sense for us to understand what she was, right? Who the sex workers were in the Bible, so to speak, right? What prostitution was. They didn't teach it to us at 5, but they did teach us that they did, jobs that other people looked down on. And then by the time you were 10, they took it up to another. By the time you were 15, that's when they finally said these were prostitutes, right? They had to teach it in a way that was gradual. And that's the same thing that we're saying, right? People, Senator Kennedy specifically, he made it seem like my book was available to 5-year-olds. And it's my book couldn't even be read by a 5-year-old.
Right,
and that's what they say children all the time, right? They'll say the children. But when they say children, they know it's a dog whistle to a person's mind's going to go to a 5 to a 7-year-old, right? Realistically, the books they're banning though are for 16 to 18-year-olds.
Right.
And so it's that's that double-edged sword that we've been fighting. is even in the way that they have framed what our books are and who our books are for. It's like, well, why wouldn't we want people 16 to 18 to understand what the hell sex is? Like, you've had shows like MTV 16 and Pregnant on for decades. Like,
Right.
You got, I mean, the states that practice abstinence are the states with the highest rates of teen
That's
pregnancies and STIs. So we have to talk to them about it. If through our books is the only way, then through our books is the only way. But yes, it's just total hypocrisy, because I'm like, the Bible has touched on way more subjects than we touch on, and again, like, even with the 10 Commandments, what is it? Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet someone's wife. Like, are you explaining coveting the wife to an 8-year-old? Like, so what are we actually, like, you know what I mean? Like, what are y'all actually talking about? Right. Like, when y'all say, well, these subjects are too mature, you don't think adultery is falls in the bucket of a mature conversation?
Right.
Now, I don't think that that's not something you couldn't have with a 10-year-old, but let's not try to split hairs on, like, because to explain adultery, at some point you'd have to explain cheating, which means at some point you'd have to explain sex.
Right.
That's right.
And I loved your book because you created such a clear picture on trying to find your identity, and in the queer community and in the Black community. And I just thought, golly, if you're a child that is queer or Black or both, it would be so nice to be reflected like that. I would think a lot of kids are drawn to that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten cards, because I do classroom visits virtually, sometimes in person. And like, I've gotten cards from kids that have changed their names because of the name change chapter, from kids who have like decided to transition with the support of their classmates, because they see who I am in the world and what I'm doing in the world, and they get to see like the roadmap of the journey, and it helps them to better understand that it is a journey and that they're not alone in it, that myself and many others have been through this before. So you now have that visibility and representation that you can attach yourself to. I get a lot of messages about, I'm gonna say that fortunately that the book saved a life.
Yes.
That a person who was having suicidal ideations was able to get their hands on the book, and it gave them a new perspective on how they could navigate life. And I even had one case where a kid went to a school board meeting and named their sexual abuser and said that the reason that they had the courage to do it was because of my book, and that my book needs to remain on the shelf, because they never would have had that courage had the book been removed and they didn't get a chance to read it. And so I watch how it is transforming lives. And so, like I said, it is very unfortunate that we've gotten to this point, but I do know that they can't stop it at this point. So it's like the book's not going anywhere.
Right.
It's actually coming out in paperback in 2 weeks. So it's another access point at a cheaper price.
Yeah.
So it's not going anywhere, but yeah, it's been a very, very beautiful journey. And I guess I wasn't even expecting, like, I wasn't expecting this story to resonate so well, but sometimes you don't even know that a story doesn't exist in the world. And so I just assumed, like, well, Black queer people have written memoirs. We rarely do it for young adult stuff. There are very few memoirs that are specifically targeted towards young adults. But when we do them, it really creates a radical shift in the mindset, and it's a beautiful thing.
It is. And the book is beautiful. And it's so funny because you're on the banned book list, but the sex parts of it are the least fascinating to me. A lot of the other stories and how your family was and how your fraternity was, I mean, all those connections and relationships, that's what stood out to me in the book. I mean, the sex chapters, I read them, but they weren't like, oh my gosh. I thought they were handled very well.
Yeah. And the biggest issue I have is that these people have not read the book.
Right.
Like, we are not, like, I always say this when I'm doing speaking engagements. I'm like, these people aren't smart. Like, they're just really not. Like, and everybody laughs. I'm like, no, they're not smart. Right. They're just well-funded, and they know how to organize, which is a powerful vessel in this country. Yeah. If you are well-funded and can organize well, you can pretty much do anything you want. So I was like, that's the difference, is we are intelligent, but oftentimes siloed, because we're so nuanced. They are not intelligent, but they are very, very organized in whatever it is that they're doing.
Yes.
Um, and I was like, everybody's like, well, how do you know they didn't read the book? And I'm like, because I called Thomas Jefferson a rapist in chapter 5. Nobody has ever made a complaint. And I was like, these people this is the type of conservative group that if they read about what I said about Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington, they wouldn't have ever even made it to the sexual parts of the book. So I was like, that's how I know they didn't read the book, because there is stuff before that would have totally pissed them off well before they got to the end of the book where those sections are. So again, not dealing with really smart people, just organized people. So
and loud.
We had the drag queen Katya on our podcast. I think it was Katya, and she said about conservatives, they're like ambitious, ignorant people. And when you combine ambition and stupidity, it's very, very dangerous.
Right.
And they really are. Like the Moms for Liberty, they are well funded. And they are ambitious and they organize, but it's just breathtaking hypocrisy and stupidity. But then you get this, these suburban people that are low to mid information voters that probably traffic in Fox News. And it's always everything. The default setting is the kids. And from where I stand, these people do not give a shit about kids.
Right.
All they want to do is make sure that women have them. And then after that, it's wipe the hands and we're done with you. And it's free will and jump into capitalism and, eat what you kill. Good luck, chickadee, because we're not doing jack shit for you. If you get sick with cancer, tough titties, we're not helping you. We're going to dictate what books you read. We're going to dictate who you can sleep with. And if you get raped, guess what? You have to carry that rapist baby. And so if they care about kids, it's just these are the people that would have been on the border when Donald Trump's administration was separating families. That is generational trauma to take a small child away from their family. And a lot of them have not been reunited yet still from that. And it's like, you don't give a shit about kids.
No.
All of this Jesus stuff and all this Bible stuff is something that you pull out to weaponize against authors like you because you are Black, you are outspoken, you have found your voice, and you are organizing your intelligence to a very diverse Gen Z. And it's helping them. And it's annihilating a lot of the things that we grew up with, the patriarchy, internalized misogyny, racism. I'm not saying that all of those things aren't there, but they were way more prevalent in the 80s when Pumps and I grew up than they are for our Gen Z kids. And so I think the work that you're doing is amazing. And I'm just going to say, I hate that you were charged criminally, but I think it's fucking badass that you are one of the most banned books in America. I'm into it. I love it. I mean, it makes me salivate. I think it's fantastic that you sit in their craw and occupy so much real estate in their brain with the truth, with your Blackness, with your queerness. I'm into it. I love it.
We're going to keep reading your books in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, the books, that's the one. I guess the biggest thing I learned is that the book does very well in very, very small pocket communities.
Yeah.
I went to Ouray, Colorado, which has less than 1,000 people in the city. And I think 130 people showed up to my book event and it sold out. And but it taught me a lesson too, around how some people have never ever been exposed to a queer person.
Right.
And how some of the people in that town had probably never really been exposed to a Black person. And they definitely hadn't been exposed to a Black queer person. And so before I started, I was like, I know a lot of y'all probably watch Fox News and have been told to be afraid of me. And I was like, well, are y'all scared? And you could see their faces literally be like, well, no, I'm not. So what is all this stuff I've been filtering in the last 6 years about queer people that I'm supposed to fear you about, right? And so by the end of it, everybody's asking questions and all those type of things. So it just taught me, one, that the book, because there were a lot of people who had read the book too in this very small city. It's the book is reaching the pockets of the country that I never would have imagined. But two, it is... I think Beyonce said it during the concert. It's like media control. It was like media is like whoever controls the media controls the mind.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's like if the media is just filtering this stuff into these people day in and day out, and they actually have no real human interactions with the actual people, they're fighting causes for people they've never met. So they're fighting a cause, but don't actually understand who the person is they're fighting. Right. They're just fighting the cause without realizing there's a person attached to the thing you're fighting. And it was like, so that's what I've learned in this too, is like, I have a lot of grace with the education I give. I don't expect other Black queer people or Black trans people to have that same grace because we've been beat up too much. But this is my mission, and I'm okay with that, and trying to, help educate and reverse people's minds. And like I said, it always reminded me of like when, Trump called the Latinos racists and rapists, and that remark, we're going to get him out of here, and we're going to get him out of here. And it was somewhere in California that came and took the poor man who had the little store for 30 years. And they were like, well, no, not him. And they're like, well, who did y'all think he was talking? Like, how do you think, like, did you think it was like something tattooed on people's neck that said, this one is a rapist, this one is a thief? All they do is, and so that's when I really, really learned. They fight for causes without even understanding the people who are attached behind those things that they're trying to fight. And so some of our jobs then has to become like actually showing them who we are really as people. And I got to see it change minds. And so I'm just grateful to be able to do this type of work in the world. And like I always said, this is probably the only list I will make with Toni Morrison. So I'm good with it. Man, I'm good with it.
Well, tell everybody how to find you, how to find your book, how to find you on social media. You are amazing. And I love so much that you are taking such an effort. And there is a risk in it. There's a lot of hateful people in the world, and you're taking such an effort to normalize your diversity and your humanity. And I think it's just absolutely beautiful. So how can our listeners find you?
Yes, it is I am GM Johnson on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. It is George Matthew Johnson because my family didn't know my name was George for a long time. So when I put George Johnson and I would try to make friend requests, a lot of them rejected them very, very early on in the Facebook years until I put Matthew in the middle. So I use my full name on there. I am GM Johnson on Twitter because I'm not calling it X. And I'm not calling it X. And IamGMJohnson.com. Like I said, paperback version of All Boys Aren't Blue comes out on the 16th. It has a new foreword written by me. And then my third book comes out in September on the Harlem Renaissance and the Black queer people from the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh, wonderful. Sounds good.
Fantastic.
Yes.
George, thank you so much for joining us. It has been very enlightening, and I hope that you continue to write banned book after banned book and continue to be provocative for good. I love it.
Thank you so much for having me and allowing me the space on your platform. It's truly appreciated because a lot of times we don't get the space to even fight back. So I appreciate this.
You're welcome anytime, George. Thank you so much.
Thanks, George.
Bye, George.
Love having an author that sits in the craw of so many conservatives like Kitten Heels and Bridget and Christian. It's fantastic.
It's such a good story. The sex stuff is like the 10% of it. You know what I mean? It's 90% relationships, identifying yourself, finding your people, that kind of thing.
Coming of age.
Yes. Which people do.
And everybody's coming of age story is different. But there's connective tissue in everybody's story of the human experience that connects us all. So I'm so happy that we had George on. We need to have more banned book authors on IHIP News. Please click subscribe, and we'll be back when we feel like it.
I'll tell you what, I've had it